Okay, welcome everybody. Thank you for coming along to this meeting of the Overview and Scrutiny Management Board. And yes, I did say it right that time, Brenda. We're going to start straight away. First thing we'll do, normally at this point we do welcome introductions and safety information. I'm not going to do the welcome information except to say my name's Councillor Tony Dyer and I'm the Chair of the Overview and Scrutiny Management Board. As the councillors ask questions, I'll introduce them by naming them. And then if officers, when you speak, if you just briefly introduce yourself. Also like to welcome representatives of Vattenfall, I know I said that one, and Amoresco to join us today. Look forward to your contributions. Safety information. We're not expecting any fire alarms, so if the fire alarm does go off, it means it's for real. In which case, try and walk calmly through the doors, out through the main doors, turn right, go down the bottom of the ramp, and meet outside the Bristol Cathedral. And then please stay there until we signed you off and make sure everybody's out safely. Apologies for absence, agenda item number 2. I have apologies from Councillor Graham Morris. Any other apologies? Okay, thank you. Agenda item number 3. Does any councillors have declarations of interest? Thank you. Agenda item number 4. Minutes of the previous meeting. Lucy?
They're just for approving, Chair, unless anybody has any comments or queries.
Excellent. We'll move on to item number 4, which is... Sorry, I'm jumping ahead of myself. Can we formally approve the minutes? Councillor Wilcox? No objections? Ooh. The minutes are formally approved. For some reason I seem to be having a problem with pressing my button on my microphone at the moment. Agenda item number 5. Unfortunately, there is no chair's business for this meeting. So this brings us on to agenda item 6, which is public forum. I'll begin with public forum questions. Question 1 and question 2 is from Dave Wedgwell. Dave's not here to ask this question, so the response to his questions have been printed and will be... Councillor Wilcox.
Chair, can we wish Mr Edgewell all best speed to recovery, because I think he's in the Royal United Hospital at the moment.
I think we can all support that. So best wishes to Dave and hope you recover well and soon. Public forum questions 3 and questions 4 are by Suzanne Audrey, and I see Suzanne is here. Suzanne, do you want to ask your question and I'll respond to it on behalf of officers?
I think I've had written responses to the 2 questions, and thank you very much for those. So it's really a process follow-up, if I'm allowed to just ask this, because I think one of the things people are concerned about with huge projects like this are the risks involved, and I understand the public aren't allowed to have all the information, but I wondered why the risk register can have been redacted and made available. Is it essential really that the risk register isn't made publicly available?
Don't have an answer to that at the moment, Suzanne. What I'll do is I'll go away and see if we can get an answer for you on that.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, Sinead may have an answer.
Sorry, apologies. So the information in this register is commercially confidential to the council and exempt on that basis. So it has been through the monitoring officer and the legal team, and yeah, it would be prejudicial to the council's interest to release that information. We balance the public's interest in disclosing information and the council's interest in keeping it exempt, and that was the view reached. So it's not a decision taken lightly.
Okay, thank you. So we're relying on your deliberations, some of which are exempt, I think. Thank you very much.
Just to clarify, today there is no exempt session. Everything we'll be discussing today will be in the public domain, unless we're advised by legal that a response to a question that's asked will need us to go into exempt session, but we're not anticipating going into exempt session. Councillor Gollop.
Yeah, Chair, not to prolong the debate at this point, but I think there is a really serious point here about risk registers in the public domain. And it, for me, if the register can't be rewritten in a form that the majority of it can be in the public domain, I think we have a problem. So can I just ask that officers perhaps discuss that with you and your deputy and try and work out a protocol for dealing with it? Because often exemption is used to reduce the amount of work needed, which I understand, but actually for something like this, to prevent interested members of the public from actually examining it, I don't think is the intended outcome.
Okay, thank you. I'll note that. Lucy is also noting it on, and then I'll pursue that with officers following. I should also have said at this point that all through this meeting isn't being webcast, it is being recorded for later broadcasts. So can I just remind everybody to please use your microphones when you're responding or asking questions. I should have warned you in advance of that, Sinead, my apologies. Okay, questions? Oh, just question 6. I thought you had more questions, Martin. But Councillor Fodel.
I have 2 questions. 5 as well.
It's okay, it just says question 6 and 6 on mine, so obviously I can't count. So,
okay. Thank you, Chair. On the screen, it asks about the recommendations of the Bristol Citizens Assembly. It was held in 2020 and developed a whole range of recommendations with a lot of investment by the council, the participants and experts in the field. So I'm asking how have the recommendations of the Citizens Assembly been taken into account in developing the initial business plan for the joint venture?
okay, the officer response to your first question is, when designing the procurement criteria for the City Leap Energy Partnership, the Council was mindful of the good work done on the Citizen Assembly pilots in Bristol. In our instruction to bidders, we asked potential partners to respond to criteria relating to community participation, making specific reference to Bristol Citizen Assembly work. Bristol City Leap will support a number of the recommendations from the Citizens Assembly, including employment and skills, transparency through publishing plans and data, decarbonising the housing stock, creating a trusted partner for decarbonisation for partners for all sectors, contributing to improved policy and regulations, creating pilot and demonstration projects, and many more. Do you have a follow-up question?
Yeah, thank you for that. I think one thing that's most significant about the recommendations overall is the ambition by the citizens who took part. And so I suppose my follow-up question is, to what extent can we take that level of ambition in formulating the business plan, because substantial changes were called for, have been called for in the city? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Martin. Is anybody able to respond to that today, or do we need to respond to Martin by email?
I can respond.
Councillor Dodd.
I think this project's the most ambitious thing that we've done on decarbonisation in the last, well, forever, isn't it? The ambition's huge. So I wouldn't say it's an exact response to the Citizens' Assembly, but if you can name something other than this that's as ambitious, then I'm quite happy to sort of take that on board and say, well, maybe we could be more ambitious, but I think this is limited by the amount of investment that we can bring in to the system. So all the figures that we're going to talk about today are at least figures. We want more investment than the at least figures, but obviously we have to set out the minimum levels of investment that are going to come through the programme if everything goes to plan. but the ambition is to do a lot more.
Thank you, Councillor Doug. Councillor Fodor, your second question.
Yes, thank you. This relating to the sort of lead from the community who have demonstrated some of the most substantial projects in the city, such as the largest photovoltaic roof in the city and the largest wind turbine in the country on land. So I'm asking, how will the proposed community forum be put together to ensure a balance between geographic communities and residents groups and neighbourhoods and the professional and special interest groups with specific themes? Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. The Council and Bristol City Leap partners have engaged with a number of community groups across Bristol. A specific is the Bristol Green Energy Partnership and their community climate action plans, to which they've made specific commitments to support. These focus on the impact of climate change in communities that can be defined in either geographic or demographic terms, and are helping to ensure a just transition to the low-carbon economy. Within the business community, Bristol City Leap is engaged with Business West and have a number of work streams supporting their members through opportunities with the City Leap supply chain, helping with their decarbonisation plans, recruitment and training of the workforce to deliver the projects generated by Bristol City Leap and supporting innovation in the decarbonising economy. The Community Energy Propagator, a consortium of community energy groups, has been engaged with the Bristol City Leap throughout the procurement process and have played a part in shaping aspects of the winning bid. Collaboration with the Community Energy Propagator will continue once Bristol City Leap launches to maximise the shared ambitions of developing and increasing community energy within Bristol. Do you have a follow-up question, Councillor Fodor?
Not at this stage, thank you.
Thank you, Martin. We now move on to public statements. The only public format statement we have is from David Wedgware, and as we've already heard, David is ill at the moment and unable to read to his statement. So we'll now move on to what I think it's fair to say is the main course for today's meeting, which is the Cabinet report on the City Leap Energy Partnership. May I ask you, Pete Anderson?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the committee for having us here for this briefing, which aligns to the Cabinet report that's going tomorrow, as it says on the slides, to the establish the City Leap Energy Partnership. Ian, you're driving, are you? Ian, yeah? Lovely. So, take you through the agenda. We're going to give a short recap of what is City Leap, also in terms of including reaffirming the social value commitments, which are really, really impressive. We last came here in April, so we want to bring to your attention the work that we've been undertaking as part of the mobilisation stage to bring us to this point. We will bring to your attention a couple of key financial matters, as well as the timeline that we're currently working towards. And as part of the paper dispatch, there was an initial business plan that is one of the appendices, and as the Chair welcomed colleagues from Amoresco and Vattenfall an opportunity for Vattenfall and Amoresco and Chris and Stuart to take you through on a few key points in relation to that business plan. Oh, thanks, David. Chair, would you like me to go through the slides? There's about 10 slides. Shall I walk through the slides and then open up for questions?
I think that'd be the best approach.
Okay, thanks. So in terms of what is City Leap, I'm sure many of you know, but for the benefit of being a public meeting, that vision around taking that opportunity to create a low carbon, smart, resilient energy system for Bristol and its communities. We want to take a significant step in towards carbon neutrality and delivering at least £1 billion of low carbon smart energy infrastructure investment in the city, with the intention that we will leverage council leadership, investment, partnerships, collaborations across the city to drive citywide action, and the working in partnership benefits both social, environmental and economic for the city of Bristol. So what have we procured? We've procured a 20-year concession to appoint a City Leap strategic partner, which is Amoresco Limited, to deliver the low fund projects across the city via Bristol City Leap in partnership with the council. Amoresco is now the pre-procured partner, which gives that first right to refusal to deliver and fund all of our low carbon energy projects for the council, and that does include social housing linked to the HRA estate via the Bristol City Leap. We will establish, and we're in the process of doing so at the moment, in relation to a new City Leap client function to be stood up to ensure that projects can be originated, tested and worked through, and that will be in line with a preset project acceptance criteria that we've developed, and I've been working through and testing as we speak to those projects that would then, if required, be approved by Cabinet where relevant. So I wanted to just remind Scrutiny in relation to commitments that Amoresco has made and also the KPIs. So ensuring that we strive for an operations carbon neutral by 2025 for the council, ensures that the retrofit work we do in the council social housing by 2030 meets the relevant EPC, and meeting the following contractual KPIs which are listed on the screen, linked to carbon savings, generation, as well as value against social value. And in the Widding tender, Amoresco estimated an investment of 424 million that would be required over that initial 5-year period out of the 20-year concession. And as you would have seen from the initial business plan, in terms of what the current plan is really, really ambitious, as Councillor Dudd said, which is really exciting for us in the city. Wanted to draw out the social value commitments because I think they're really, really impressive and of benefit for the city. So there was the 61.5 million of social value, including the circa 50 million of expenditure on local chain. There are a number of funds, so a community energy development fund as well as an R&D fund, which will support innovation and collaboration for the city, and want to also to create a community benefit fund. The crowdfunding opportunity as part of the commitments to harness and seek capital investment also across non-heat network projects. We thought was very innovative as part of the bid, and really excited to see how that can be delivered. But also very strong commitments around equality, diversity, inclusion. The commitment working with the Centre of Sustainable Energy and other partners to support the finalisation of no-co homes strategy. 100% of the people working on City Leap will be paid at least the real living wage, and very important and very exciting at the same time is to create over 1,000 new jobs in the city, both around work placements and apprenticeships. So linking to skills and employment, as I said, 1,000 jobs committed to, of which 410 will be within the postcode area of BS1 to BS16. We're continuing and we'll work in partnership with Amoresco and Vattenfall in relation to engagement with higher and further education, but also building on the work that we've done with the One City Economy and Skills Board, where we've established a task and finish group regarding City Leap and opportunities around skills and employment, as well as with Bristol West, Bristol Works and other startups and organisations in the city linked to economy and skills. 20-year partnership will allow a long-term strategy around local supply chain and that confidence around the projects that we deliver, as well as outreach within schools and colleges, and working with the council's own learning development and recruitment colleagues to ensure that we can maximise opportunities to attract and secure the best employees across the city. So we mobilised in April, at the end of April. So for the last 4 months, 5 months, the core team who have worked alongside me have been working tirelessly with Amoresco and Vattenfall around 11 strands of mobilisation. So we finalised the legal agreements or finalisation of them, and there's been minimal amendments, which is great. The business plan that's attached, and we'll bring out a couple of key points for you in later slides. Pleased to say that the 2P consultation concluded successfully on the 11th of November with no significant challenge, and there's some really good conversation and in-person engagement that was fronted by Amoresco and Vattenfall, supported by the council's HR team. We've been working towards the finalisation of the transfer of the heat network assets to Bristol Heat Networks Limited, with the asset transfer due to take place on the 7th of December. We have commenced the recruitment for external BCC director, so a non-executive director, to be appointed in December, and that's progressed well as an internal director appointment within the council's current directors within the council, which are working through. As previously mentioned, establishing the client team function, so not only the function but the acceptance criteria to test out projects, as well as going out to recruit for new posts, as well as an extensive engagement with not only external partners but briefings internally, ensuring that the communications within departments are in place to ensure that we can work effectively both within the council but also across the city and city partners. So we've had no material changes that have arisen and underlying from the proposition presented by Amoresco through the tender submission, and you'll see from the initial business plan that we've shown an acceleration of deployment, or there has been an acceleration of deployment through the business plan, which is really exciting to build out that low carbon infrastructure for the city. Cost benefit analysis was undertaken, arising from the income generated from the concession, as well as the energy service budget savings arising from the 2P transfer, with the number of staff being transferred over to JVCO, which was rebalanced the costs for the existing client function from the savings from the staff that have 2P'd across. In terms of contingent liabilities, largely as presented at the preferred bidder stage, relate to the pension liabilities for staff transferring and the 2P, the agreed share of redundancy and pension strain should they arise in the first 3 years, and 300k indemnity in respect to a specific land ownership issue that has arisen regarding the build of the heat network. So a quick slide on timeline. So the Cabinet papers released, taking us into scrutiny today and then Cabinet tomorrow, with the intention to asset transfer on the 7th of December, with the stand-up on the week commencing the 4th of January to launch the partnership and to close out on the contracts, with launch events and communication and coordinating marketing in February and March. What I'll do now, I'll hand over to Chris Dorbaget from Amoresco and Stuart Allison from Vattenfall. Thank you.
Hello, thank you everyone for having us here today. Just like to say, a great opportunity that Bristol has put forward in declaring a climate emergency and the action that you're taking to be able to provide a kind of a city-wide approach to decarbonisation. I think it's we all recognise a very forward-thinking approach to decarbonisation, which hopefully will meet the scale of demand required to try and tackle this emergency that we're dealing with. So just to initially take you through some of the numbers that we have here up on the screen. Apologies, I can't see that fast. I'm going to have to bend over this way. I do have the table in front of me, by the way, but we went through the bid process. We were very grateful to have succeeded to get this far, and we've reviewed what can be done since the bid process in April 2022 with all the new information that's become available, and we're really pleased to say that we've been able to accelerate, or feel that we're able to accelerate how we can deliver projects in the scopes, the areas that we can deliver projects. It's now become a very community-centric type of project, type of delivery, with over 61% of the investment in the low carbon infrastructure side, that's not including the heat network piece, is a focus on residential properties. So that's around social housing and the private housing industry. So there's a real focus towards the tackling some of the issues which have been more recent, that have been around high energy prices causing more people to move into fuel poverty. So that's really focused into our plan moving forward. Certainly believing that giving people a basis of which they can work from, so comfortable homes, providing jobs and creating income can free people to be able to do more towards supporting the city and hopefully in the area of decarbonisation, because the plan is a very balanced plan, we feel. We've listened to a lot of the... if there's one thing we can say about the COVID period, is that moving to a Teams-based operation of meetings meant that we can have back-to-back meetings from 9 till, well, sometimes it felt like 9 o'clock at night as well. But we managed to cover a lot of ground and meet a lot of, have discussions with a lot of the community groups, community energy groups, and really build into the plan what we felt was most being asked of us from the city. And we hope that's reflected in the plan now. And the idea to be able to give back jobs is the key part in this whole delivery of this plan, so that we can encourage. We need the resources to continue to deliver the services over the 20-year concession, and we certainly recognise that this isn't something that one party can do on their own. This is a coming together of the public sector, the private sector and the community working together on the same focus to try and deliver this programme. In isolation, no one party could do it on their own. And I think that's what's so encouraging about the approach that Bristol has taken. And if I can move to the next slide, I think we covered off a lot of the other points in previous slides. But you can see from the graph here, we're trying to depict really the market segments that we're working over. There is a clear objective to have carbon neutrality within the authority's estate by 2025. So there's a big focus on the to drive that decarbonisation through the authority's estate. And as you can see, building on that as the bars get slightly larger over the 5 years, there's a big focus. It starts with the social housing in year one, and then we roll through to the following years, growing our presence in social housing and the private homes as a combination of low income properties as well as the able to pay market, as we call that, to provide vehicles for people to be engaged very easily on the decarbonisation journey. There is, like I say, there's a big focus on low income homes and also on creating those jobs and preparing the market, the jobs market, ready to be able to service the green economy as we move forward beyond the 5-year concession into the 20-year, over the whole period of the 20-year concession. If we can, move to the next slide. Oh, and now I'm going to move on to heat networks. I'll hand over to my colleague, Stuart.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you for having us here today. Just touching briefly on the work that we plan to do with the heat networks. It's worth saying that heat networks are sort of recognised by UK government as the most cost-effective way to decarbonise cities, and it's in that vein that the council's done great work establishing some existing heat networks, which present the seed from which we can scale up and grow, and that's really what this business plan sets out the intent to do. There are 2 existing networks in Redcliffe and Allmarket, with another in construction in Bedminster. We'll be looking to pick up the good work that's been done already and scale out and expand that to a further 5 at the moment in the current plan, whilst also looking to include additional opportunities outside the areas shown in this slide, looking at the entire city and trying to sort of work towards that large interconnected piece of new clean infrastructure that we'd look to build, tapping into sources of clean heat. That means that we can move the buildings off fossil fuels. This will be done in partnership with the work that Amoresco is doing inside the buildings, looking at how you can insulate and reduce the energy demand within each building. it's a really exciting time for us to be in Bristol working on this venture, because it will come at the same time as the legislation and development of the market to regulate heat. At the moment, heat's unregulated, but it's expected that over the next couple of years, this will be a sort of fully regulated industry, and Bristol's really at the forefront of thinking with the scale and ambition needed to actually make a dent in the climate ambitions. I can talk in further detail about some of the specifics, but I think the messages are set out clearly on the slide that we're looking to grow the existing networks, establish new ones across the city, work with stakeholders and community groups to create those market conditions for the transformative growth to be realised. And all of the work that we do with the heat networks will contribute to the overarching City Leap objectives in terms of decarbonisation, inward local investment, job skills, as we build out a supply chain capable of doing this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, before I hand over to councillors for their questions, I just want to check one item myself. You mentioned heat networks obviously have been taking up a large amount of the focus, but that's not the only part of what City Leap is proposing. There's also quite a lot of investment, obviously, in energy efficiency and heat pumps. In terms of, the reference was made to the 424 million. Roughly, how is that divided between the heat networks and the other provisions?
I'll take that. We've actually, the ambition is now to lift that to just over 630 million. And that's roughly divided half and half, with 307 on the low carbon infrastructure side, and then the remaining, sorry, my maths isn't as great, 320 on the heat network side of investment.
Okay, thank you. Which councillor wants to go first? Councillor Wilcox.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your presentation, gentlemen. I'd like to ask about the strategic heat main that's going to be running from Avonmouth to Old Market via Patchway, Southmead Hospital and down to St Jude's. It's still an aspiration of the project, from what I can tell. What's the expected cost of this heat main, and how long will burning our rubbish in incinerators be necessary to make this scheme economically, but obviously not climate sustainable? I've asked questions about the CO2 output of the Avonmouth incinerator, and the council simply does not know how much material is burned on site, let alone the CO2 output. So I'm really interested in how we're going to do this, please.
Thank you. If I take your points in turn, there's one of cost and then of CO2 emissions from capture of heat. So first off, it is our intent. It's to pursue the strategic heat main. It's included in the business plan, and it's the concept on which we're pursuing. Part of the work we'll be doing next year is to do a lot more on the viability of that, ensuring the next level of detail still shows it's robust. It's clearly a major infrastructure project for the city. We'd expect the investment to be somewhere upwards of 75 to 100 million pounds. It would run through South Gloucestershire into the city to supply fossil-free heat to the networks being built out in the city centre. Along the route, we'd be looking to connect up to other buildings along the way. The principle with which we're approaching this is to not become reliant on one single source of heat, but looking to capture heat from multiple sources to draw them in. So whilst today we'd be looking to connect into the existing industrial processes in Avonmouth, we'd be designing the network, we'd be designing that pipe to accept heat at low temperatures from other sources en route. And I know that South Gloucestershire Council's done a lot of work on looking at capturing heat from depleted coal workings and coal mines, where you can tap into these other sources along the way. So I'd really like to sort of press the point that there are other sources of clean heat along route. Directly tapping into the question about energy from waste and combustion of waste that's not being recycled. At the moment, that heat is rejected to atmosphere, and what we'd be looking to do is to bring this in line, working with partners that operate those plants to bring this in line with how a lot of European and Scandinavian energy from waste plants are operated, where that heat isn't wasted, it's captured. At the moment, that's just going up the chimney for the birds. We want to capture that to actually increase the overall efficiency of the energy extraction from those processes. We'll also be looking at other parties within that sort of industrial cluster who do have sources of waste heat. In terms of the CO2 credentials specifically, we know that we're working with very forward-thinking operators on those plants who are looking themselves at how CO2 could be captured and stored to really look at the whole picture. And I'd like to be able to present more detail next year in order to say these are the steps that we'd look to really check the environmental credentials really hold water. But I recognise the question, and it's really just sort of an understanding that we're taking those on board as we look to develop.
The £100 million figure you quoted just then, is that included in the 450 that's been talked about just here?
Yes, there's an element of that in there. In the event that for any reason the strategic heat main isn't proven to be viable, we'd expect a similar amount of investment to be required, but distributed across the city in other smaller localised energy centres. But we expect it to be a sum of around that needed to source the low carbon heat.
Okay, thank you.
Before I go to Councillor Parsons, I think one of the things that's driving the concern about energy from waste is that we have had a situation in the past where we were concerned that Avonmouth was becoming a focal point for burning waste, and I'm sure you're aware that the arm's length company that we work with to look after our waste, Bristol Waste, their target is to get the 0% waste. So going forward.
Totally understood, and as I say, long term we want to build this infrastructure that means that you can tap into other sources of heat that's currently rejected to atmosphere or wasted. If you can do that with low temperatures, it means that you can do it at higher efficiency. And this is infrastructure that's going to be in the ground for decades to come. So it's really important that we make those forward-thinking, joined-up decisions at this feasibility stage to make sure that we don't get locked into anything that presents a challenge later.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Parsons.
Thank you, Chair. We are creating a private monopoly supplier of heat energy. Where are the protections for customers in terms of price, but also reliability, continuity of supply, repairs, customer service? And what happens to someone who gets cut off?
So, thank you for your question. I mentioned earlier that heat is currently unregulated. We learned that last week the government restarted the progression of the energy bill through the legislative process in Westminster. This includes provisions in the enabling legislation to regulate heat, and it's indicated that Ofgem will be the regulator. We expect that picture to change. Heat will be a regulated industry within, we expect, a couple of years. I completely agree with the concerns that you raise, because it's critical for us, for people to trust this initiative, this venture. Otherwise they won't buy into it, and we won't be able to grow and help provide the impact we're looking to bring. In terms of protections that exist, there are commitments through customer supply agreements around how prices are set and communicated. Provision for protections for vulnerable customers, and guarantees of reliability and supply. In the event that people are without heat, there are obligations placed on us as the heat supplier to reconnect or make alternative provisions available. So those protections do exist, but I agree that they're not to the same extent that exist in the electricity and gas markets. That will change. I think it's also worth saying that the construct that we have with the City Leap venture specific to Bristol is that whilst Vattenfall will be operating the heat networks, we'll be doing it in close alignment with the council, and through the client function mechanism that was mentioned in the contracts, there will still be continued oversight and transparency of the how prices are set and how the company's being run. We are committing to publish the build-up of the heat tariff transparently on the website, so people to understand how the costs are built up. And all of this is being done to kind of bring it back to the point that if people don't trust the network and they don't trust our service that we'll be providing, we won't be able to scale up and meet the commitments that we're required to deliver in the main targets you saw earlier in the presentation.
I just wanted to add to that in the interim period until that heat network regulation comes into force, the council's going to be taking a special share in Bristol Heat Network, and the primary reason for doing that is to try and make sure that we've got some oversight and control over those sort of areas that Stuart was talking about the continuity of supply, about the fair and transparent pricing, and we'll be utilising that to that effect.
And you've talked about a fair price for heat energy. What counts as a fair price, and how's that calculated?
So we'll be answering the question, what would I otherwise be paying if I wasn't connected to one of your heat networks, to come back to the monopoly point that you mentioned. So we'll maintain a sort of publicly visible comparator to say if I wasn't getting my heat from the heat network, how much will I otherwise be paying for a similar service? And that's for the supply of low carbon heat that is fully sort of serviced. If it disconnects for any reason or if it goes down, someone will come along and fix it. It's a higher level of service provision than you'd get if you had your own boiler and it broke down and you'd have to get a plumber on the phone and go through that process. So all of this will be set out clearly, and that's what we mean by an affordable price. Is what would you otherwise be paying?
Got one more question, if that's all right, Jim. Thanks. So part of the contract is to retrofit council housing to EPC rating C. I'm concerned that energy performance rating in conjunction with a heat network isn't necessarily enough to actually keep somebody's home warm. So people may end up having to resort to supplementary heating, things like plug-in electric heaters. Have there been any calculations done of the likely carbon impact of those sorts of supplementary heat sources? And also what potential impact that might have on somebody's overall energy bill?
So the intent is that the retrofit's done hand in hand with the heat provision, and the connections to the heat networks will be sized in such a way that you can meet the levels of comfort required within the property. You shouldn't have customers left after a building refurbishment and a connection to a network having to then top it up themselves. I would say that it's really incumbent on us to get those calculations done right, but we won't be leaving people in a need to supplement their own heating above and beyond the connection. Chris, would you add anything to that?
All the work that we do is in accordance with current regulation. So there's a whole accreditation body called PAS, and in that there's a whole design process which looks to ensure that no one's left without enough heating. It's all independently signed off before any work takes place. So there's a huge amount of design work and review work which takes place, rather than a review of the work which actually does go on in the building is checked to make sure it complies with the design, so the design intent is carried forward in the construction, and all these calculations are done up front and signed off independently before we can do any work, and then they're credited. They get a certification after to say that it's all done, and that's run through client function. Actually, put the pressure and make sure that it's all carried out properly. So we adhere to all those processes So there should never be an instance where there isn't enough heat. If there is an instance, that's likely because something has gone wrong with the heat control, and then there's protections in place in terms of call-outs and response times to make sure that that's all managed and people brought back to where they should be in the shortest period of time. So, yeah.
Kai.
Yeah, can I just come in on the point about EPCC? That's the commitment we've put in regards to the level of investment that we've outlined in the 30-year business plan for the HRA. So what we put down is about 80 odd million when we set out that plan. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, someone will, I don't have the exact figure, but to get that to like a passive or a net zero standard, you probably need about £500 million of investment in that stock. I don't know, is that correct? Yeah, I don't have the exact figure, but roughly about half a billion to get all our property up to a net zero standard. Stephen?
And your example is a good one where there's a process of assessing the viability of all the investment cases, particularly given the decision that Cabinet's being asked to take tomorrow doesn't bind the council to any investment in any scheme. Any situation like that would itself be a decision for the administration if it was investing council money, HRA money, and it would all be captured in that business case. So, if you've got a drafty building that can't be made, airtight, it's sufficient for a trickle of warmth to warm it up, then the business case presumably would fail, and we would not be making that investment.
Councillor Kent, and then I have Councillor Birdsall to follow.
Thanks. I've got a couple of questions. First one's one I asked last week in our briefing. It was just to find out, because of course this is quite a late change to our stock, whether or not the tower blocks are included in this contract or would be in future. Do you know we've got an issue, we've got to replace the cladding on quite a few of the tower blocks. I was just wondering if you'd got an answer on that.
I think Stephen may want to respond. Pete?
Yeah, I followed up with Craig Cook today in relation to engagement to understand the procurement route, but also to engage the engagement with Amoresco. So the specifications are being worked through, and it's something for us to work in partnership with. Nothing further.
I mean, I wasn't at the briefing, so apologies if I'm coming at your question the wrong way. But of course, everything's in scope because it's a concession. As to the cost of the EPS works and what it does to the HRA 30-year plan, that will obviously be reviewed in the next HRA business plan in line with our normal cycle, so February.
Okay, and I think one thing being put as a positive then, that if it is in the scope of the contract, is that obviously we don't need to go through another procurement phase. I guess what I raised last week, and I guess just to get reassurance of that, because I think it was partly given last week, is that this does not seem to cause any delay, and that we can put timeframes within the request to Amoresco. So we need this work done within X months or X years. And if you're not capable of doing that, we can then go to another contractor to do that. Can you just confirm that?
Yeah, Craig reassured me today. Thank you. Yeah,
right,
Craig Cook, sorry, from the officers.
Yeah, that's reassuring. Okay, thanks. I just want to ask about the issue of political accountability then, because obviously there's going to be this joint board set up. There's a couple of directors, but coming back to then the political accountability of the council, paperwork talks about. Sometimes it will come back to Cabinet. I want to be careful what I say because I'm not too sure which is in the public and which is in the private. So I'll remain vague because I see the lawyers now giving me stern looks. I guess my question actually isn't actually what's in the paperwork, because the paperwork, as far as I can tell, on either side doesn't mention it. What's the flexibility for political accountability given the new system that's coming in 2024? So when we design the new committee system, is the flexibility to, let's say, increase political accountability written into the contract or not?
I'll take that question. In the contract we have taken account of the change of governance system and worked through those provisions, so that is there. What how the concession agreement operates is that Amoresco have the right to install low carbon energy infrastructure on our estate. So that's what their concession payment is for. So we won't be altering that right, but what was a key decision under the current administrative system will still require political approval and political accountability. And we put quite a lot of time and effort into that and thought that 500k is that point at which we feel that members really do need to get involved, where the scope and the size of projects are such that accountability needs to be included. So that's how that will operate.
I guess I've got a follow-up question, because I see exactly what you say there, and that makes good logical sense. One of the two directors will be a council officer, and there'll be a director of a company and a council officer. Now, my very sketchy knowledge of business law is that if you're a director of a company, your first port of call is obviously to the company, not to any other loyalty, should we say. I'm presuming that would be the case here. I mean, it's not a trick question, I'm just checking that that's standard.
No, and we were well aware of that. Helen's a very good corporate lawyer. But we took that into account because the way in which the council has input and can feed into the joint venture is in a number of ways. So obviously 2 directors on the board is a very key measure. But as you say, their first responsibility, they must always act in the best interests of the company. And we obviously wouldn't ever want them not to do that. But we are also one of the shareholders. We own a 50% shareholding in the company. And then certain decisions are reserved to the shareholder, and the council, acting in its capacity as shareholder, is completely free to act in the best interests of the council. And then any projects need to go through a project approval process. They need to come back. They'll go through the delivery board that's been set up. So there's a number of ways that we will feed into this joint venture. So yes, if we only had the directors, I think we would be quite concerned, but they're just one of a kind of string of measures we have available.
So just, I mean, obviously, I think you've got the point there, Councillor Kemp, but I mean, it's the person of the shareholder that will be will be for the committee to determine how it wishes to basically passport that responsibility. It currently obviously sits with the mayor and it's delegated to the deputy mayor for finance. It's the shareholder effectively who provides the key to appointment of directors and other things. So that's how you maintain that control.
So it could be you, Tim. Councillor Bradshaw.
Thanks, Chair. Just on this point about non-executive directors, I think in the past there have been a number of issues where senior council officers have acted as directors of the council's own companies, and the decision was taken for this role to be taken on by backbench councillors for, I think, very good reasons. So I would just state a view that, my preference certainly would be for this role to be held by councillors elected members, because their first responsibility is to the company under company law and not to the council or indeed anybody else. That aside, I wanted to ask about the golden share or the special share, which is quite commonplace in the council's companies. From what I've heard and what I've read, this would drop away when Ofgem regulation comes into force. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right.
I personally think there's a very good reason for keeping the special share in place, to give a guarantee to the citizens of Bristol that their interests will be protected. My understanding is golden shares and special shares are rarely used, but are quite powerful guarantees in that sense. So that's a comment that I would want to make. And secondly, on procurement, because the entities in the joint venture are not governed by public law, how can we have a say in the way they procure? For example, giving advantage to local jobs and local employment. That for me is a critical part of what City Deal brings to the table. But if the joint venture is not governed by usual rules of procurement, how can we have any sense that is going to be how things pan out in reality? Hopefully that makes some sense. It is my understanding from the papers that the entities would not be governed by public law.
Yeah, that's correct. And of City, it has been structured in a way that means that we have procured Amoresco through a regulated procurement process to make sure that going forward we can speed up delivery. The fact that the JV Co is outside of public law means that it is not subject to public procurement regulations. In order to make sure that they're delivering on the social value commitments that you've mentioned, we've got specific KPIs in the concession agreement around that, and those KPIs have got real enforceable consequences on Amoresco if they fail to meet them.
Are there any further elements of the question you want us to comment on? Is that...
Did you want a response on the golden share?
Yeah, the golden share, the procurement issue is fine, and thanks for clarification. I think it's the golden share issue, please.
Yeah, so the reason we've put the special share in place in this instance is purely to deal with the lack of regulation, because there isn't regulated industry, and that is why at the point the regulation comes in that covers off the areas we wanted to protect that we saw as vital to Bristol, it will then fall away.
I think it's probably worth saying that Ofgem, sorry, apologies, that once national regulation comes in, as it says, Helen said, it's got to cover all the points we want covered before our special share falls away. But also I think Ofgem will have wider powers than the council could ever have, and so actually the standard of regulation will be higher then, so we won't need the special share there, but we have thought about that quite carefully.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Gollop.
Thank you, Tony. If it's all right, if I take you through my comments and questions, and then I'll pause for response at the end, if I may. My first comment is that obviously I welcome seeing the administration and Councillor Dudd embracing the free market in such a positive way. And I welcome the innovative approach. But I can't help the comments that I have, and they're not meant to sound negative, but I just want to highlight that I don't know enough from the information I've been given to actually be able to assess the full package that we're being presented with. And this is in spite of questions and comments that I've asked over a period of time and have never had adequate answers to those. Not least the fact that I think all the scrutiny meetings listed in the report were all delayed or deferred or cancelled and reorganised because the information wasn't available, and that's happened again this week. And that is frustrating when, as members, we ask for sufficient time to be able to digest and understand the proposals before they went to Cabinet. And yet here we are again, having them presented the day before a Cabinet meeting with a briefing that was rescheduled that I certainly wasn't able to attend and therefore didn't have the benefit of. So with apologies to the representatives of Amoresco and Vattenfall, because I really don't want to be raising these concerns in front of you, but this is the only opportunity I have to share those concerns. So page 4 indicates 1.4 million of legal fees and 1.25 million of accountancy fees. Now this isn't sour grapes just because the lawyers got more than the accountants, but it is a concern about the amount of money that we have spent on advice. That money is more than the concession payment we get over 5 years. We've got investment of 424 million over 5 years. In the covering report, there was no real indication of the allowance for inflation. Although I see in the appendices there is a reference to inflation, but there's also no indication of when the inflation calculation starts from, because that 424 million has been in place for some time, and over the period of time it's been in place, inflation has already been running at a fairly significant rate. But I'm presuming that rate is fixed to the date we actually enter into the agreement. So already there's a loss there. The report talks of 1,000 jobs. but actually there's no indication of the full-time equivalents. And I'd like to understand more about what those jobs are being created. It says, I think, 400 in Bristol, 600 therefore not in Bristol. It would be interesting to know more of the profile and what the benefits are. We were asking, or Mark was asking questions about the golden share. For me, whilst consumer protection is really important, we have raised repeated questions about governance in this whole process. Now, Councillor Wilcox and I offered or asked to actually look at the detailed agreement. I have to say I'm quite relieved that no one's taken us up on that, because having seen pages in this report, the complexity of it is enormous. But I have a real concern for both sides in this, that actually, if something goes wrong, trying to enforce that agreement is going to be an absolute nightmare. Now, the bit that's therefore difficult for us as members, and it's probably true of most legal agreements, is that by the time anyone's talking about enforcing the agreement, things have gone so badly wrong that it's going nowhere. But how workable is it all? In practice, interpreting what is there about the processes for approval. And if someone doesn't pick up on what's offered, what the alternatives are, and what the City Council may be precluded from doing that it might otherwise have been able to do, because it now has to offer it to the joint venture company. So there's a whole host of things out, and I'm really just airing my concerns. I don't think anyone can put my mind at rest today. I'd love to think they could, but these are really complex issues. Now, if I move on specifically to heat networks, in the main body of the report, you've removed all reference to transfer at cost and now have no description of how the figure for the transfer has been made. I previously raised the question of whether this sale is being made at undervalue. And the problem is that avoiding putting a value on the assets in the report isn't an acceptable way of complying with best value. There may be a valuation which by chance comes back to cost by the time you've allowed for risk. I understand that. But if we have paid 2.6 million people to £2 million to advisors, I would have expected them to have come up with some form of valuation that was a start point for our consideration, and to reinforce the points I've made previously that have never been accepted or taken on board. If we've been investing over a period of 5, 6 or 7 years in a project that is now more valuable than it was when we started, I would expect there to be some benefit of that uplift accruing to the City Council as the investor who undertook the risk. If it hasn't materialised, then the question is, what have we got wrong in getting to this stage? Because we clearly haven't spent the money wisely or invested it well. So I would expect there to be an explanation. I'm presuming as well, and I would like an answer to this, I could not understand from the report what happens to the loss in Bristol Heat Networks. I was absolutely aghast to discover by just going through Company's House that the company lost £1 million up to the 31st of March 22. No way have members ever been briefed on that loss. So the fact that it's lost £1 million, is it the council taxpayer who's paying that £1 million? Is it Vattenfall who are paying that £1 million? What happens to it? It was beyond me to actually understand the narrative in the paperwork, but I think it's really important that we understand who's borne that loss and who's bearing the loss between 1st of April 22 and the time the deal is done. I've probably gone on long enough, so I'll wind up there. But what I'm just trying to convey is a worry that if this is really as good as I want to believe it is, and as the spin on the report says, why are we concealing these things and not actually responding to them openly? Because that's what gets me feeling uncomfortable, is when I feel things are being brushed under a carpet or put to one side. If they're confronted as a problem in the report, I'd understand it. but when they're not, I feel uncomfortable. So, in conclusion, not that I want to disagree with anything that's being put forward, but I have not seen enough that I could form an opinion that I could endorse this however much I want to. And therefore I wouldn't be able to support a positive recommendation, but I'm not wanting to put in a negative recommendation either. Thank you.
Does anybody want to make a response? Okay, thank you, Jeff. I have a couple of questions. One of the things that was mentioned was about energy efficiency, and obviously in the HRA we put quite a bit of money, about 80 million aside. I noticed in the interim business plan you've gone from 22 million up to 77 million for energy efficiency matters. Is that alongside what the HRA is doing, or will you be enabling what's already in the HRA?
So that's enabling what's in the HRA, but also looking at external investment through match funding for the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund as well, to bring to maximise the leverage available.
Okay, and then my next question is, you mentioned about focusing on residential, and obviously, as somebody who grew up in the council house, I'm very keen to see the social housing getting the focus it deserves. But we do have people living in private housing who are also on very low incomes. So there's two parts to this. The first part is, could you explain what we're doing about people living in private residential who want to take advantage of what City Leap is proposing? And then the other part of it is, there will be some people in the city who are able to pay. How would we cope with those people?
Yeah, I think we recognise that as well. And fortunately, I was in social housing, but I was in a low-income family from in the East End of London. So I understand your concerns. There are the Home Upgrades Grant Scheme is a scheme that we're looking to tap into considerably for low-income homes. We're already delivering projects through that scheme successfully, and they're making a huge change to the lives of those people who are living in those homes now. So some without any heating at all are now getting heating into their homes. And then we have the able to pay market, as you say, where we're looking to tap into working with financial companies and banks to bring in very low investment financing and with the higher prices in energy as well, is providing actually a really good return on investment for homeowners where they're able to pay to move down a decarbonisation route. That's both through solar and heat pumps are the key areas there for deployment. But with heat pumps, as you're probably aware, we need to insulate the homes first. It's a fabric first approach, and then a heat pump solution, so that we can absolutely minimise any cost impact of using heat pumps as well. So that's how we're approaching it.
Okay, thank you. And my next question is, there's 4 separate funds I can see. We have the £6 million plus crowdfunding, which will allow residents to invest, which I know is something very close to Councillor Martin Fodor's heart. There are also the Community Energy Development Fund, which is 1.5 million over 5 years. The Innovation Fund, which is £500,000 over 5 years, and the Community Benefit Fund, which I think is 2.8 million over 20 years. Without going into too much detail, because I imagine it could take an hour or so, could you just briefly describe what each of those, or somebody briefly describe what each of those are focusing on?
So these are funds that we're generating. We did a lot of work with the energy propagator and various energy groups during the bid phase, when we were looking at what to include in our proposal that meets the requirements of the city. And one of the areas was we recognised very, very quickly there's a huge amount of community participation in Bristol, more so that we see generally across the UK, and they're all doing such fantastic work. So one of the key areas we wanted to do is make sure that they can continue to help support the decarbonisation efforts, because they're so involved. at community level. And this is a whole hearts and minds piece, as well as just a technical delivery solution. So engagement of the community sector is hugely important to the success of this project. So the community fund, community energy fund, is around what we understood to be the most difficult part around development of projects, is that initial seed funding to get the project off the ground. Once it's turned into a business case, it becomes a lot easier to then find funding to deliver those projects. So the Community Energy Development Fund is really around supporting community projects who go out and apply their time to be able to do that, so cover their time. And that comes with resources from us as well to be able to support them, whether that's meeting room space, whether that's someone to help take notes, someone to fill in a gap in skills that they may not have to be able to drive that programme forward. Is anything that we can do to support the community groups doing more of what they're doing so well in Bristol. So that's one. The other one, the R&D fund, was really about innovation. There's a huge, we've got two universities here, there's a huge interest group in Bristol around the whole decarbonisation piece. There's a Bristol is Open website, I think it's called, where there's data supplied there, which we'll be looking to support with additional data on that website to help innovation, to give the information to people to be able to then go on and do find the next, well, hopefully a silver bullet one day to help with the decarbonisation. But that's what the R&D fund is about, is to drive innovation. There's the community benefit fund, which is really about providing a return to the community for whatever they feel that they want to invest in, whether that's, so it's completely down to the community to decide. So if that's a school playground, if that, whatever it might be, community centre refurbishment, that's purely for the council. That's driven by how well we're doing. We can contribute more back into the community fund. As you say, it's 2.8 million, I think, is the predicted value over a 20-year concession. And then I think I missed one fund now. I think the
Community Energy Development Fund.
The crowdfunding, yes. So the crowdfunding is really important. So we think that there's a huge number of people from the community groups that we've spoken to who see this as a great opportunity in Bristol and want to be a part of it, but haven't got the time and the resources to go and find projects and build their own. So we will be developing projects that will be, we're going to need funding to deliver these projects, and we're opening up that funding opportunity to the local Bristol people to be able to invest into those projects and get a return out of this initiative that the council are taking. So 6 million is really just the beginning of what we're able to do. So as we are able to build out more infrastructure, which provides a good return, then we can put those projects out through crowdfunding platforms to be able to get investment from the community so they can feel involved.
Thank you. Councillor Gollop.
Thank you, Tony. I thought I'd better come back in and be a bit more positive. And two things really, but one, I should declare an interest in that I'm a member of Bristol Energy Co-op, and to me, to hear you talking about that and the potential for the city is fantastic, because there are enormous opportunities. But if I am more parochial and deal with my own ward, where I would recognise most of my residents would be in the more affluent bracket and able to provide or fund their own carbon reduction. But the main problem is that they don't know what to do, how to do it, and what's recommended. And many of them would be in a position where they would be keen to move it forward quickly if they could only know what to do, which could help produce a significant carbon saving if only they could be guided. And I put myself in that category as well, but you as a layman can read about it, find so many different bits of advice given to you, most of which conflict one with another, and not know where to go. So it's just a question of what are you going to be doing to actually attract that market, to actually recognise that it can, the savings it can make and would be happy to make and implement relatively quickly, so that you could actually see some quick wins coming in rather than the more difficult funding issues that may happen on some of the other projects.
Yeah, I absolutely recognise that market, and I think that's great because they actually set the example straight away, and they do provide early wins. So we're producing marketing literature and creating a whole end-to-end vehicle to make it very, very easy to be able to say, I want to put solar panels on my roof. Here's a mechanism to be able to go along that journey and get the benefits. So that's working with banks to be able to put at scale to better drive down the costs of the technology it needs to go in and the cost of capital to be able to deliver that, and producing very clear and transparent returns on what they're signing up to, and then creating a very disruption-free as possible, because we're always disruption-free as possible opportunities to get the solar panels, heat pumps, insulation, lighting replacement into people's homes, and then benefiting from the savings that they'll make on their energy bills. But that's a process that we're going to build that customer journey, and we're going to tap into the potential and the scale of Bristol City Leap to really drive down the price to get the best value for clients in the able to pay market. And that just releases, hopefully, the opportunity for them to invest in other crowdfunding projects, which can then be shared with the benefits that can be shared with communities maybe who can less afford to do that work. So
Chair, and I'm not raising this to go through the Bristol Energy debate again, but if one looked at where the customer numbers came from for Bristol Energy, my ward and a couple of the other more affluent wards had the highest number of uptake from residents who wanted to buy in and thought they were contributing to the social good in all the arguments that we had for having an energy company. I'm raising that in the context that if that psephological or economic data is available within the organisation, I think that might be really useful to share with our partners as a possible way of seeing where some enthusiasm and commitment would come from geographically across the city, and that might be a useful way of targeting those who would be affording to fund their own improvements.
Good point, thank you. Councillor Wilcox.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to come back in on a point you made about the private housing stock. On page 38 of the big bundle, you talk about the funded by Homes Upgrade Grant Scheme, the HUGs. There's an aspiration to qualify 158 low-income households to deliver 2.8 million of insulation windows and heat pumps. Would the Cabinet member like to have any idea what percentage of our housing stock that is?
It's a very, very small number.
Yeah, it's 0.09%. Not very ambitious, really, is it?
No, it's a pot of money available from government.
Did you put your mic on?
Yeah. I mean, like many activities within this area, from time to time, small pots of money become available from government, and we've obviously put a bid in for this home upgrades grant, and I think there's a second phase of it coming very soon, so that there should be a report coming to Cabinet, I think in February, for a second phase of it. But I think if these small pots of money do become available, it's right that we put in bids to obtain the money, and obviously it's limited by what government put on the table. So if it's money to upgrade 200 homes, then we have to take it. Obviously the ambition is that we'd like to upgrade 20,000 homes, or I think there's 200,000 addresses in the city. So don't know what percentage of that is.
207,000 homes in Bristol. Take off the 27,000 council homes, 180,000 private homes.
Yeah, I share your sort of is it concern, or well, I share your view that it is a small number of homes, but that's just what that grant enables us to do. But what do we do? Not take it, or do we take it?
Oh no, we should take it.
Okay,
definitely.
Right.
I look forward to the
and that grant funds 200 homes.
And I look forward to the February Cabinet submission.
Councillor Parsons, and then I have Councillor Kent.
Thank you, Chair. You've spoken of the client function. Now, it seems to me this is a really important element of all of this. So it's a team of people within Bristol City Council who are able to hold the private partners to account to ensure good value to the public purse. Now, we know that the private sector has very often different interests to the public sector. They can pay better, and frankly, in some circumstances, they can run ring around us. So, especially at a time of austerity, how are we going to ensure that the client function is robust, has the right skill set, is well resourced?
We've appointed a number of people already and have targeted relevant energy sectors, journals in terms of recruitment to get the best for the client function. We'll continue to do so, working closely with our strategic partner in relation to designing how that client function should work to enable us to get the best in relation to a process. Working closely with existing colleagues within the core team who have lived and breathed City Leap for 4 years to release those opportunities for those staff, of which, pleased to say that we have made some internal appointments who are very close to City Leap to understand the construct of the legal entity in terms of also understanding the decision pathway for the council. We're still due to go out to recruit for a few more posts, so that gives us another opportunity to continue that targeted recruitment. So the good thing is we're harnessing the learning that we've gained to date, but also we've still got some further recruitment to do. So.
Stephen? Yeah, it's a really valid point, particularly given a number of us sat here last week or the week before talking about our budget challenges around the scrutiny of those budget proposals, and it's fair to say that every post, including the client team, is being looked at extremely closely. I'd add only to what Pete said by noting that two of the largest areas of potential council investment here are our social housing and our own operational or our own property, effectively. Both of those teams, they're quite well populated already. They would see having someone to help navigate the investment, for example, into our own operational, our buildings, as a core part of the property team's job in that case. And so we would expect to have full engagement from a team in property, probably some financial support to pay for a bit of capacity embedded in the team. And, of course, those teams, property and the HRA, are very used to procuring and working with the private sector. So I think we see there being a good core of skills. Like, for example, you take our head of responsive repairs and maintenance in the housing team. I mean, he's responsible for hundreds of millions of pounds worth of procurement already, and he's going to be integral to this. So I think it's not going to be easy. We need to make sure we have a properly resourced client team, because it is the gateway. It's not only how we keep the private sector to account, but it's how we hold the council to account to enable decarbonisation on the estate.
And I guess you probably recognise from my previous question, I don't have such a sanguine view of the free market as Councillor Gollop does. I tend to feel that one of the curses of the private sector very often is optimism. So it's my questions about what if things go wrong? So what if the finance can't be raised to achieve these, all of these goals? What gets cut? What happens to the physical assets, to the customer base, to the IP, to the intellectual property, if the partnership goes south?
So there are quite extensive provisions in the concession agreement and the other agreements to deal with what happens if City Leap doesn't go to plan. And I think there has been a lot of thinking about the assets and where they would go and how they would work. The plan is during the term of the concession that projects will be called off, and where they are projects not on our estate, they will then belong to Amoresco or Vattenfall, and so they will carry on operating those projects, delivering that decarbonisation. Where they're on the council's estate, those terms will be agreed, but obviously if they're part of our physical property, I imagine that, you know, there'll be a strong emphasis on them, you know, being retained by us and carried on being operated. And then there are also kind of extensive provisions within the agreements that we want the relationship to survive. It's a 20-year agreement, and much like any 20-year relationship, it's going to hit its bumps. It's, you know, they'll be rough and they'll be smooth. But what we have got is a lot of provisions for either escalation, early escalation, so that issues can be resolved, and also for provisions for expert determination. So if an issue comes up between the parties, someone external comes in, resolves the issue, and everybody moves forward. So the emphasis is on this long-term relationship being able to go forward. So yeah, it's a definite concern, and we've, you know, put in a number of different provisions, I think, to address that.
Councillor Kent and then Councillor Massey, and then I'll start to bring it to a close.
Thanks, Chair. I had two sort of different areas to just ask some questions about. The first is the people to deliver the schemes. So we had a government scheme a year or two ago, which was a bit of a disaster. They weren't able to really deliver the installation schemes. But one thing which was exposed out of that is when you went to find somebody to insulate your home, is there were no companies in Bristol offering that. Most of them were in South Wales. So what's going to be done to ensure that we've got the capacity in the local market to be able to deliver insulation, solar panels? What addition are you going to put into training? How are we going to make sure we've got that recruitment process in place? That was my first question.
I'll take that one. Yeah, so I mean, I think one of the things I would say is the beauty of, you know, City Leap and the City Leap partnership is it's a 20-year partnership. It has a very forward-looking view in terms of the things that we need to deliver. And with that forward-looking view, we're able to give confidence to the market, to the supply chain, to the educational bodies, higher and further, to start to gear up that supply chain. So in the early stages, you know, we're working very closely with, you know, the likes of City College and YTKO, Building Bristol and the like, and lots of the companies that were already working locally to build up that skill set in terms of, you know, building heat pumps and creating insulation and, you know, and doing kind of a lot of the installation work. But that will really need to expand and ramp up as the delivery ramps up. So much like that chart that you saw earlier with the various graphs that kind of increase in scale, so should the supply chain and the number of people delivering on those projects.
Okay, thanks. Well, I hope it does, because obviously that would be a major threat to the project if we haven't got the staff to deliver the actual project. Going back to the heat network, I was just reading through the paperwork, and I mean, it's quite ambitious in what it wants to deliver over the next sort of 6-7 years, the proposed expansion. I mean, getting close to 10 times the amount of properties currently being getting energy through heat. So from what I read is the hope, the ambition is that by 2028, about 120 gigawatts per hour of heating will be, I guess that's per year, will be through the heat network. I guess my question is, how realistic is it that we're going to be able to generate that heat? I mean, how much of that is expected to potentially come from Avonmouth? How much of that through other renewable energy sources, roughly? Are you able to sort of give an indication?
Yeah, certainly. So I agree the plan is an ambitious one. We set out something that we thought showed that a sign of intent for what we wanted to do. In terms to the sourcing of the low carbon heat, the business plan, I think if you dig through that, you end up with around a 60% split coming from 60% of the heat coming from Avonmouth, 40% coming from other sources generated within the city. I expect as we get through the further stages of development, some of that will change. Some of the number and location of some of the buildings that are connected will change from the pipeline and the tracker that's already been established by the work that the council's done, trying to map out where these loads are, all the feasibility work that's been done to date. Some of that will develop and change, but that does show the scale of what needs to be done in order to try and mitigate the use of fossil fuels for heating.
Councillor Massey.
Thank you. On page 38, under schools and education centres in Bristol, it talks about providing around 1.4 million of low-carbon heating solutions to a school and study centre delivering low-carbon technology, and also that around a further 50 schools, libraries and other public buildings will be considered as well. And my question is, who's going to make the decision on which one deserves it more than others? If you're only talking about one school and only 50 schools, libraries and public buildings, that's not a huge number. So who will make the decisions on this?
So the reference to a school and a study centre is a project that's literally about to start. So that money has already been secured. Those locations were identified via a study of which ones would, essentially attract the most grant funding in order to, in terms of decarbonising their buildings. So the new phase of that is to now go on and use some low carbon skills funding to look at around 50 buildings, mainly schools, libraries and things like that, for much the same purpose. So the main grant funding part at the moment is the public sector decarbonisation scheme, but the criteria around that are ever reducing amounts of grant funding, so it does make it quite challenging because we have to match it as the council. So we can love to do as many as we possibly can. It's going to be restricted by how much funding we've got available, I'm afraid, or alternative ways of funding it, which is where hopefully City Leap comes in and can help.
Okay, thank you everybody for your questions and contributions. Thank you to officers and to the representatives, to Chris and to Stuart. Thank you for coming along. I'll try and make sure I remember your names better next time. We're going to be moving on to agenda item 8 now, so please don't feel the need to stay and listen to us bore you to death about something entirely different. The only thing I'll say is what we will be doing now after the meeting is Oz and members will work on a report to go to Cabinet tomorrow. So you'll get to see a summary of some of our comments today. Thank you. Okay, agenda item number 8 is Resources Scrutiny Committee Budget Consultation Update. And this is to receive a verbal update following on from the extraordinary meeting of RSC on the 22nd and 23rd of November. So this is over to you, Jeff, just to give us a brief update.
Thank you, Tony. I think extraordinary probably is a fair word to describe it. We had something like 7 hours of discussion, and what I think was particularly significant was, apart from Stephen being present for the whole of that time, which was impressive, but even more impressive was the fact that I think every member of the Cabinet turned up for the whole of their session, and I've not experienced that in many years of financial scrutiny. And what was also interesting was that I think it's fair to say that there was more sympathy with Cabinet members than there was antagonism. And in fact, I don't think there was any antagonism at all. There was a real understanding from members of the extent of the problems the authority is facing. The purpose of the extraordinary meeting was to go through the items that were being considered as part of the budget consultation, and that gave members a chance to question in more detail and identify and understand those issues. We recognise that they may or may not be in the final budget proposals, but what is intended now is that we have 2 dates currently set for the 31st of January and the 1st of February for 2 further meetings. We sounded out members of resources at their last meeting, and they very much were of the feeling that inviting the other scrutiny commissioners in to join us for the session on those departmental budgets was actually extremely constructive, because it meant that we were engaging with the people who scrutinise the service delivery, rather than simply being scrutinised by those of us who deal with the finances. And therefore we felt that it was appropriate to repeat that for those two meetings. The only issue that members did raise is whether we might be able to give more than 21 hours between the end of one meeting and the start of the next, and we're looking at to see whether that's possible. But that's really where we are, and the working group, the task and finish group, will carry on being briefed in the meantime on the budget situation and the budget proposals in more detail, which we hope will enable us to identify more of the items that we need to concentrate on in those two meetings. But I'll happily take any comments or questions from members.
Thank you, Jeff. I think the two comments I would make is, one, obviously we have a budget consultation process at the moment, so I imagine feedback from members of the public is being fed into that as well. And then the second one is, at some point this month we'll have to draft local government finances settlement, and then we're to get the final local government finance settlement in January. So hopefully we'll have some idea of what's being put into that by the time you hold your further meetings, depending who's Prime Minister.
I think it's fair to say that's the hope, but it's always pretty tight, and I think that the various changes in government that have gone on as well, there is less likely to be clarity before the event, which is often the case. So I would anticipate it will take officers some time to work through all the details. So the dates you're giving are when we hope to get that information, as I understand it. But I would not expect to push finance officers for a detailed analysis for some time after that.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody else have any comments? No, in that case, we'll note Jeff's verbal update. The next three items, or the last three items on the agenda, also we're going to go through very quickly because they are just for noting. Agenda item number 9 is the climate change working group scope in terms of reference. We actually had the Councillor Katie Grant, the chair of the climate change working group, came to us last time and gave us an update. This is just the copy of the terms of reference. So unless anybody has any objection, Councillor, go up.
Sorry, I don't have an objection, but I was just looking at this and thinking if they were meeting daily for the next 3 years, they might manage to do justice to the items they've selected. And I just wonder whether we shouldn't be giving some sort of indication of what we expect, because it's an extraordinary workload, and I would have thought they would be better to focus on one aspect of what they're trying to consider to produce something that's potentially beneficial to us. That's not to play down the importance of any of them. Just a feeling that I can't see how they can deliver on all those. So very much not wanting to put a damper on it, but just feeling, should we be giving a little bit more guidance to help? Could perhaps leave you to look at that with others and see if you can hone something down?
Happy to do that and discuss it with the climate change work group as to, after discussing it with you, OSM members as well, as to what we think they should prioritise as being the key items. But apart from that, the terms of reference, I think we all agree, are all things that do need to be looked at. It's just which ones probably need to be looked at first. So on that basis, can we approve the terms of reference? Okay, thank you. Item 10 is the work programme. At present, there's no changes to the work programme, but that may change depending on what happens over the next well, between now and the next Oslo meeting, we may well have to add things to the work programme. We are living in, as Jeff has indicated earlier, we are living in a situation that's very highly fluid. And then the last item is the Mayor's Forward Plan, which I think we were told at one point there were up to 28 items potentially coming to January Cabinet. I understand that triage has been applied to those items, otherwise that's going to be the longest Cabinet meeting in history. So it's just to note the Mayor's Forward Plan as a standing item. Is that okay with everybody? Okay, well with that, I'll call this meeting to a close. Thank you all very much. Thank you, Stephen, for staying for yet another meeting. And thank you for the members of the, well, member of the public plus councillor for staying along to the end. Thank you very much.